I experienced a lot of culture shock. One of the first things my parents told me to do was to get my driver's license. That was really scary because on Guam, there's no big highways. When I first moved, I felt very homesick and culture shock and just struggled to assimilate. It was poetry that was a space for me to write about home and to write about my memories growing up on Guam. Poetry, literature, music, and the arts, especially in Pacific cultures, are expressions of our identities. So much of our cultural knowledge and practice and history is embedded within our stories. We are full of very rich and profound depths, and we are very powerful, and we have so much life and diversity within us. We are connected because the ocean is what connects all our islands together.
What's up, everyone? Welcome to Nesian News. Our mission is to connect and inspire our Islander community by sharing Islander success stories with everyone. So stay tuned for the full episode. This week for Nesian News is kind of different because we got a co-host. So Lula's on today, and today we're interviewing Dr. Perez, who is a CHamoru poet, associate professor at UH. And today we're going to dive into all of his poetry, and he was the first Pacific Islander to do so. And so he was also co-founder at Ala Press, which is the U.S. publisher focused on Pasifika literature. And yeah, we'll just dive into that and really how the importance of literature is in our Pasifika youth and how that all is. And so we'll take it off from here. With the first question.
Okay. Well, our first question was just starting with your background. What was your experience like growing up as part of the Chamorro/broader Pacific Islander diaspora?
As well, half a day. Thank you both for having me. And shout out to all the listeners of this program. I was born and raised on the island of Guam in the village of Mongmo, and grew up there till I was 15 years old. And then my parents decided that our family was going to migrate to California. Like many other Islander families, kind of looking for new opportunities. And so, I was a sophomore in high school. I didn't want to leave Guam at the time, so I was kind of, upset that I had to leave all my friends and family and my school. And so, but going to California, I experienced a lot of culture shock. And, one of the first things my parents told me to do when we got to California was to get my driver's license. And that was really scary because on Guam, there's no big like highways or anything like that. And so trying to learn to drive on the California freeways was really terrifying. But I was able to get my license, to start at a new school, and to really adjust to new life of living, away from home and in the diaspora. Thankfully, there were lots of Chamorros and other Pacific Islanders in Northern California. So I was still able to feel like I was connected to our culture and our community. And so, my experience as a diasporic Islander, my experiences with migration, I always felt a sense of like homesickness and but I never truly felt like disconnected because I was always surrounded by our people, our language, and our culture. And so, for me, I'm just very thankful to all the Islander communities, in the States that have really created, community spaces for us to maintain our cultures, even though we're far from home.
I'm super curious. How did you find your people, especially when you're out there in California? Was it hard to find them, or where did you go? It was like a restaurant or something. How was that for you?
Yeah, it was hard at first because, this was back in the 90s. We didn't have cell phones, smartphones yet. The internet was just starting to kick off. And so, I always had to, just rely on word of mouth. A lot of both my mom and dad's relatives lived in California at the time. And so, just people calling us on the phone, telling us where the next fiesta is, or, what church everyone goes to, and, invited to different, parties and get together, stuff like that. So a lot of it was just word of mouth, and making those connections and just showing up as well to community events, whether it's certain like, feast days or religious holidays or culture events like like Liberation Day, for example. And so, yeah, it was really just connecting with family and, just meeting relatives, just different events and stuff like
So, do you think that that sense of being away from home is what inspired you to start writing poetry, or like what really brought you into the medium? Like what attracted you to it, and what does it mean to you?
Yes, definitely. As I mentioned, when I first moved, I felt very homesick and, felt a lot of, culture shock and, just struggle to assimilate. And it was poetry that was a space for me to write about home and to write about my memories growing up on Guam. And, poetry really became a space where I could stay connected. And it really felt like a bridge back home to me, where I could kind of return to the past through my writing and just kind of foster that connection back home. And so I'm really grateful to poetry for giving me that, kind of emotional space to really process, uh, the struggles of being in the diaspora, and also, just to feel that connection back home wasn't completely severed.
Yeah. No, that connection is what it's all about, especially for other young Polynesians, Pacific Islanders who are out there and they're listening to this and we feel disconnected. And we're disconnected from our culture, from our language, because we don't really know it. We're not really surrounded by it. Do you think that artistic expression or your work in poetry can kind of help them reconnect with that and help them through those experiences?
Yes, I think that's a great point. Poetry and literature in general. We could even add, music and the arts. All of that, especially in Pacific cultures, are expressions of our identities. And so much of our cultural knowledge and practice and history is embedded within our stories. And, not just written stories, but also just oral stories as well. If we're lucky enough to be with our elders, our parents, our grandparents, listening to them talk story. We learn so much cultural lessons just from storytelling. And so, yes, I think really, our stories keep us connected. They teach us about who we are and where we come from. And, also our stories can travel, right? We can, you know, if we're just talking about books, of course, we could, order books from other writers in Tonga or Fiji or Aotearoa or Hawaii, and we could carry those books with us to California or Chicago and New York, and we could keep those stories close to us. Similarly, our memories are kind of books as well, where, if our grandparents told us a story growing up, we can remember that story and carry it with us wherever we go. And we could always, kind of close our eyes and kind of re-listen to what they've told us in the past and, continue to feel that connection, even though we might be, scattered all over the world.
So I think especially in like the Chamorro context, a lot of the education in Guam focuses on pushing STEM. So amongst like Pacific Islander youth, what do you think are some of the challenges you've seen in fostering a passion for art and poetry and writing, especially in your experience as an English teacher?
Yeah. So, I think this is true both back home and in the States, where, a lot of the curriculum in the school system is very, Americanized and hardly ever includes anything about Pacific Islander culture or history. And so it can be difficult for our youth to, access that cultural knowledge in the classroom. And oftentimes, of course, that leads to feelings of invisibility and maybe lack of dignity or pride in our cultures because we don't see it reflected in the curriculum. And so, I do think it's really important, myself as an educator, to, always try to include Pacific Islander, writers and scholars and artists and political figures, especially for my Pacific Islander students, so that they can see themselves in the classroom. They can feel inspired and empowered they could feel pride in our culture and in our intellectual traditions. And of course, it's important for non-islanders too that I teach, where they can learn about the Pacific as well, because, as you both know, it's not often included in the American curriculum. Um, Beyond that, it's always a struggle because, so much of our, especially diasporic islanders, surrounded by American culture, and what we see on TV and in the movies is often not our own people's. And so we become more, maybe interested or engaged in other cultures, artistic production instead of our own people's. And so I think it is important to, continue to educate our people with our rich traditions, art traditions and music and so on. And, once I see like Pacific youth start to become involved in Pacific arts, it just transforms them. Whether it's learning a cultural dance or even getting cultural tattoos, or even reading, cultural stories, they just like have that look in their eyes that they feel that sense of pride and cultural connection that really, I think, is an important way for us to stay rooted in our cultures so that we can, be stronger in who we are.
Yeah. I remember there was this time where it was like in middle school and you were talking about how we're underrepresented in the curriculum. And at the very end, they took a survey of like, okay, how well do you feel represented in this social studies class? And I was like, not at all, because we literally did not touch at all around Islanders or Pacific Islanders at all. And so it's this idea of how do we put our voices out there and become a part of the curriculum. And so people know who we are and we know who we are. How do we do that?
Yes, it's a struggle. And, thankfully there is a movement of Pacific studies, and there are many Pacific studies scholars who are emerging, and there are some Pacific studies programs that are starting to be established at universities across the U.S. And so, uh, the next step is then for us to introduce that curriculum into K through 12. And where I see that mostly happening, to be honest, are cities and states that have large Pacific Islander populations, like California, where I live now, as well as Washington State. And so, what it takes is honestly Pacific Islanders, going through higher ed, getting our degrees, going to graduate school, and then we become teachers, right? And, them, as educators, we have the power to shape the curriculum. And of course, that can go further where, we can have Pacific Islander legislatures or politicians who are maybe on the school boards who are able to advocate for changes in the curriculum, especially in cities that have large Pacific Islander populations, because, public schools, right, their mission is to serve the whole community. And if there's a growing Pacific Islander population within that community, then it's, important for these schools to service those students as well. And, that involves then, community leaders educating, non-Pacific Islander teachers about our histories so that they can more easily include it in their teaching as well. And so it's kind of, takes both community work, takes our populations
Yeah.
to be organized. And then it takes, individuals who, like I said, pursue higher education, and then, pursue these positions of power where we can make a difference.
So, thinking about your work in your last poem of your most recent book, Amit, you talk about the Pacific written tradition, and I really love that poem a lot. But you talk about how like our ancestors have a visual literacy that's kind of underrepresented and not seen within the colonial lens. Um, and especially thinking about the problems that islanders have in literacy now. How do you think that poems like yours can reconnect Pacifica youth with our ancestral knowledge and our ancestral ways of being, especially since so many of us are growing up in the diaspora and we're separated from our traditions?
Yes, thank you. Thank you for reading my book, first of all. Uh, Yeah, so the poem we're talking about, I wrote many years ago, actually, in 2010. And the context was, I was able to return back home to Guam after my second book was published. And I worked with the Guam Humanities Council to visit a bunch of public schools, as well as the university and the community college, and just share my poetry with the students. And I was at George Washington High School on Guam, and visited an English class, and read my poems. And I noticed one of the students started crying during my reading, and so afterwards I asked her, what was wrong, or why she was crying. And she said that she had never seen our culture in a book before, and she thought we weren't worthy of literature. And to me, to hear that from a teenager say something so profound, uh, really touched me, and kind of put me on a further mission to inspire our youth and to prove to them that we are worthy of literature, and that we are writers as well. We're storytellers, and we've always been that, even though um, anthropologists will tell us that Pacific Islanders were illiterate people, that we were simply just oral storytellers. But that doesn't recognize all the other kinds of visual literacies that we have, whether it be um, carvings, wood carvings, or architectural designs, or canoe building, or tattoos, and so on. There were so many ways that our ancestors were able to read the natural world, and to transmit stories through really creative and innovative forms. And so, to me, I wanted to kind of remind our people of that rich history, and then to you know think about writing within that tradition as well. That is just another form of artistic expression that our people are more than capable of. And so, for me, I've been very fortunate to visit a lot of schools, and to visit a lot of Islander communities across the U.S. And my message is just that we have these rich traditions, that there are these amazing books and Pacific Islander authors that we can read. And I always try to encourage other professors I meet, or K through 12 teachers, and I'm always sending them resources like, teach these books in your classes. If you have Islander students, here's a book by a Samoan author, here's a book by a Hawaiian author. And if you have those students, you could introduce these texts in the class. And when I get to meet these students, they feel so empowered once they get to read stories from their own people. And so it's a long project to make these changes, institutional changes. But I'm so thankful to the Pacific community, because I see so many people engaged in this work, and it's so important to us to lay the foundation for our youth, so that they can then take the next steps in the future.
What are some of the main books that you would recommend to our audience? Like, specifically thinking like teenagers, young adults.
Yeah, it's a great question. I often will recommend anthologies, because you get a lot of variety, you get a lot of different authors. I'm not just recommending like one person or one book that you may or may not like. And one anthology that I just co-edited is called Indigenous Pacific Islander Eco Literatures.
I've read it. Good. I read your stuff in it. It's good.
Basically, an anthology I co-edited with a Marshallese writer named Kathy Jetno Kijner, and a Tongan writer and scholar named Leora Kava. And we worked on it for like 7 years, brought together about 90 different Pacific Islander authors from Melanesia, Micronesia, and Polynesia, and the Pacific diaspora. It's all kinds of different genres. So there's poetry, fiction, nonfiction, even chants, and some theater. And then it's written in multiple languages. So it's, both in English, in Pacific languages, in Pidgin. And we have even some translations from Pacific Islanders who write in French, who are from like Tahiti, for example. And so it's very diverse. It's all focused on the environment. And even there are poems about climate change in there. And so I definitely recommend folks that that's a good place to start because there's lots of exciting work and it's all related to the environment, which is a huge theme within Pacific literature.
Dean, you want to go?
Yeah. I think something that's on my mind is this idea of we are all coming from one people, from one mother tongue of our Austronesian ancestors. And so, what role do you think poetry has in the broader struggle of connecting Pacific Islanders across the world, especially considering the ways in which colonial powers have separated us by drawing geographic lines of Melanesian and Polynesian and Micronesian?
Yes, that's a great question. Um, so, as you point out, there are many, cultural, linguistic, political, and historical differences between Pacific Islander groups. But of course, due to various, colonial histories, uh, there have been these categories formed that, group certain islanders together. And of course, in this larger uh, pan-Pacific identity that has, taken hold over the past, maybe 30 or 40 years or so. And, these categories are, of course, always in flux and they are often still being defined and struggled over. Sometimes certain identities are rejected and replaced by others. Even we use in our conversation today, Pacific Islander and Pasifika, and so that's even two ways of thinking about a similar type of uh, identity across our differences. Now, to help us imagine those differences as well as imagine the far distant past of our, Austronesian ancestors and connections, takes a lot of imagination and, takes a lot of, critical thinking as well. And so, literature can help us to imagine those connections from the past, and they could help us articulate the differences we have in the present. And so, I hope we can get to the point where, we do honor all our differences and respect our differences and learn from each other. But at the same time, we do feel that deeper kind of, as you put it, kind of the mother tongue, mother culture that we do all come from and see that, despite our differences, we have so many similarities, culturally and, even through the arts.
And there's one question that I always love asking because I always get different answers from everyone that I bring onto the show. If you could put up a sign, and this sign goes on every Pacific Islander door, and so millions and millions of people, they see this sign every single day as they walk in and out of their home. What would you put on that sign and why?
That's a very poetic question. Um, for me, the first thing I thought of was actually Peliha Ofa's line, "We are the ocean." And I've always loved that line. And, it's the ocean is, as how Ofa teaches us, is one of our most powerful metaphors. And, that phrase, "we are the ocean," can mean so many different things, to our peoples. And even just every day, if I had to see that sign every day, I would have probably a different interpretation of it. Um, but ultimately, I feel like when he's saying we are the ocean, what he's saying is that we are, full of these very rich and profound depths, and that we are very powerful, and that we have so much life and diversity within us. I think when he says we are the ocean, he's also teaching us that, we are connected because the ocean is, what connects all our islands together. And so I think he's also reminding us to kind of stay connected to each other. And, then lastly, kind of connecting it to kind of migration, diaspora. I think he's trying to teach us too that our peoples have always migrated, have always been mobile and on the move, given our rich seafaring and navigation traditions. And, I think he's trying to teach us to to always kind of go with to like be in the flow, right? To thrive within the currents of movement that our people have always been traversing. And I think that's an important lesson as we, are far from home, to think about the currents and the flows that continue to be within our hearts and our bodies, that we are the ocean, even if we might live near a lake like you two do. And so to me, that's always, I love those lines. I would choose that by the great Epeli Hau'ofa.
Thank you so much, Dr. Perez, for your time and sharing your story and advice. If anyone was listening to this, they really want to get in touch and contribute to something that you're working on, how could they do that?
So I'm on Facebook and Twitter. So always happy to connect with folks on social media. If not, you could, always email me. I'm easy to find online. I have a website you could contact me through as well. And, I always love connecting with other islanders, especially. And so please, feel free to reach out to me anytime.
Hey, you made it. Thanks for listening to this Islander success story. If you want more of these, head over to Nesian.news. Sign up for our newsletter. We'll send you an email every single time we put an Islander success story out there. And remember, our mission is to connect and inspire Islanders around the world.